The collective had conquered 17 star systems before they encountered the border.
Fleet Commander Vrixis stood at the helm of the Eternal Dominion, the flagship of the Xyrathi Armada, watching as the stars streaked past the observation dome. His 4 primary eyes tracked the tactical display, while his secondary pair monitored crew activity throughout the bridge. His scaled hide, a deep purple that marked him as high-born among his species, gleamed under the soft bioluminescent lighting that the Xyrathi preferred.
"Commander," his tactical officer, Korath, called from his station. "We are approaching the designated coordinates. The uncharted sector lies ahead."
Vrixis turned his elongated head, clicking his mandibles in acknowledgement. "Sensors to maximum range. I want to know everything about this region before we commit to entry."
The Xyrathi collective had been expanding for 3,000 cycles. They had subjugated the Malori, absorbed the crystalline entities of Proxys 7, and utterly annihilated the Vorn Empire when they dared to resist. No species had ever posed a true threat to their conquest. The universe, it seemed, belonged to them.
This new sector had been discovered by long-range probes 17 cycles ago. Initial readings had been promising: multiple planetary systems with signs of development, energy signatures suggesting an industrial civilization, and most importantly, no evidence of the advanced defensive capabilities that might slow the collective's inexorable march.
"Readings coming through now, Commander," Korath announced. "I'm detecting unusual patterns."
Vrixis moved to stand beside his tactical officer, his clawed feet clicking against the metallic floor. "Explain."
Korath's smaller frame hunched over his console, his fingers dancing across the haptic interface. "The energy signatures are inconsistent with our projections. They appear to be deliberately muted, as if they're being concealed."
"Primitive attempts at stealth, no doubt," Vrixis dismissed. "Continue our approach. Scan for military installations and population centers. The collective will add this sector to our domain before the next cycle ends."
The fleet moved forward, 1,200 vessels strong, each one a testament to Xyrathi engineering. The Eternal Dominion led the formation, a massive dreadnought that stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with weapons capable of cracking planets.
Behind it came the conquest carriers, each holding 1,000,000 warrior drones in stasis, ready to be deployed for ground operations. Support vessels, mining ships, and colonization platforms followed in orderly rows, everything needed to subjugate a civilization and strip its resources for the collective's use.
They had done this so many times that it had become routine. The first sign that something was different came 2 hours later. "Commander, we've crossed into what appears to be a demarcated zone," Korath reported, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "There are marker buoys throughout this region."
"Display their message." The holographic projector activated, showing a simple beacon, clearly artificial, clearly placed with purpose. It repeated a signal in over 40 different formats, mathematical progressions that any spacefaring species would recognize as attempts at communication.
The translation matrix took only moments to decode the basic message. When it appeared on the screen, Vrixis felt his first twinge of irritation.
"Warning. You are entering United Earth space. Unauthorized entry is prohibited. Turn back or face consequences. This is your only warning."
Laughter rippled through the bridge. Lieutenant Thesix, the communications officer, made a clicking sound of derision. "They give us warnings? Do they not understand what approaches them?"
Vrixis allowed himself a thin smile. Arrogant creatures. They assume that warnings might deter the collective. He gestured dismissively. "Continue forward. Document this for the archives. I want a record of their hubris before we grind them into dust."
The fleet pressed on, passing the marker buoys without hesitation. The Xyrathi had received similar warnings from countless species. The Vorn had promised to unleash the fury of 1,000 suns. The Malori had threatened ancient weapons of terrible power. all empty words from doomed civilizations.
An hour passed, then another.
Commander, we're receiving more detailed sensor data now, Korath said. The species identifies themselves as humans. They appear to be carbon-based, oxygen-breathing bipeds, fairly standard anatomy from what we can determine.
Their military capability? Difficult to assess. I'm reading significant industrial activity throughout the sector. Planetary installations, orbital platforms, what appear to be shipyards. But their fleet movements are strange. Strange how?
Korath's secondary hands trembled slightly as he worked the controls. I'm not detecting any defensive formations, no ships moving to intercept us, no communications chatter suggesting alarm or mobilization. He paused, checking his readings again. It's as if they don't know we're here. Or
they don't care.
Vrixis felt something cold settle in his secondary stomach, an organ that the Zyrathi used for processing particularly rich nutrients, but which also seemed to react to danger signals from the subconscious mind. He dismissed the sensation. 16 successful conquests had proven that there was nothing in the galaxy that could threaten them.
"They're fools, then," he declared. "Our approach is obvious. Any species with even basic sensor technology should have detected us by now. If they choose to ignore our presence, it simply makes our task easier."
But even as he spoke, he noticed that his bridge crew had gone quiet. The usual background chatter of officers coordinating their duties had faded into uncomfortable silence.
Take us to the nearest inhabited world, Vrixis commanded. We'll begin there.
The fleet adjusted course, heading toward a planet that sensors indicated held the highest concentration of the species called humans. The journey would take 6 hours at standard fleet speed.
Vrixis retired to his quarters to review the intelligence that their sensors were gathering. He studied the human form, bilateral symmetry, 2 primary limbs for locomotion and 2 for manipulation, a single head housing sensory organs, and presumably their cognitive center. They were smaller than the Zyrathi by a considerable margin, lacking the natural armor, redundant organs, and venomous bite that made his species such effective warriors.
On paper, they should be easy prey. But something in the sensor data nagged at him. The human worlds they were scanning showed evidence of heavy industry, far heavier than a species at their apparent technological level should require. Their planet's surfaces were dotted with structures that the sensors couldn't quite identify, and their orbital space was thick with satellites and platforms whose purposes remained unclear.
Most troubling were the anomalies in the deeper scans.
Human bodies contained unusual chemical compositions. Their neural activity patterns were erratic and difficult to model. Their population centers seemed to operate on cycles that made no logical sense, periods of intense activity followed by periods of near stillness, with no apparent external trigger.
"Curious," Vrixis murmured to himself, but he set aside his concerns. Curiosities did not stop conquest. Only superior firepower could do that, and everything he had seen suggested that the humans possessed nothing that could challenge a single Zyrathi warship, let alone a fleet of 1,200.
He was still reviewing the data when the alarm sounded.
Vrixis was on the bridge in moments, his claws leaving gouges in the corridor walls as he ran. "Report."
Korath was staring at his console with an expression that Vrixis had never seen on the tactical officer's face before. It took him a moment to identify it.
Fear. "We've been scanned," Korath said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scanned? By what?"
I don't know. The sensors detected a sweep across our entire fleet, every ship, every system, every frequency we use. It lasted less than a second, and then... He swallowed hard. "Commander, I believe they've analyzed our entire technological capability in that single moment."
Vrixis felt the cold sensation return to his secondary stomach, stronger this time. "That's impossible. Our encryption."
Bypassed. Our firewalls, our counter-intrusion systems, our military-grade protection algorithms, all of it bypassed in less than a second.
The bridge had gone completely silent. Every officer was looking at Karath, then at Rixus, waiting for reassurance that wasn't coming.
"Show me," Rixus commanded.
Karath played back the sensor log. For 0.7 seconds, every ship in the fleet had been bathed in an invisible wave of energy, a scanning pulse of such sophistication that their own sensors had almost missed it. During that brief moment, data had been extracted from their systems at a rate that shouldn't have been physically possible.
The humans had read them like an open book.
"They know everything," Karath said. "Our fleet strength, our weapon systems, our shield frequencies, our command structure, everything."
Rixus stood very still, processing this information. Then he straightened, forcing his voice into calm authority. "Then they know they cannot win. Our fleet is overwhelming. Our technology, while perhaps not as sophisticated in some areas, is still more than sufficient to—"
"Commander," Lieutenant Thessix's voice cut through his words. "Incoming message. It's from them."
"Display it."
The holographic projector flickered, and suddenly a being stood before them, a human, rendered in perfect three-dimensional clarity. Rixus studied it with his 4 primary eyes, noting the soft skin, the single pair of visual organs, the strange covering of fiber over its head.
When it spoke, its voice was calm, terrifyingly calm.
Zirathi Fleet Commander, you have entered United Earth space in violation of our territory. You have ignored our warning. Our sensors have now analyzed your vessels and determined your intent.
The human paused, and though its face was alien and unreadable to Zirathi perceptions, something in its expression made Rixus take an involuntary step backward.
You have come here to conquer, to kill, to enslave. We have seen your kind before, not your species, but your type. We have encountered empires built on blood and suffering, civilizations that measure themselves by the worlds they've burned. We know what you are.
Another pause. When the human spoke again, its voice had dropped to something that was almost a whisper.
"You should have turned back."
The message ended.
Rixus stood in the echoing silence, aware that every eye on the bridge was fixed on him. His mind raced through tactical options, strategic considerations, historical precedents. But beneath all of that, in a part of his consciousness that he rarely acknowledged, something primal was screaming at him to flee.
"Increase speed," he commanded, ignoring that voice. "All ships to battle stations. We will show these humans what it means to threaten the Zirathi Collective."
The fleet surged forward, weapons charging, warriors waking from stasis. Whatever the humans thought they knew, they would learn the truth soon enough.
Or so Rixus believed.
4 hours later, they reached the human world.
It was a blue-green sphere, orbited by a single natural satellite and ringed by thousands of artificial structures. Cities glared on the night side, vast conurbations that spread across continents like luminous growths. Ships moved in orderly patterns around the planet, carrying cargo, ferrying passengers, going about the daily business of a spacefaring civilization.
None of them reacted to the approaching fleet.
"Sensors report no defensive mobilization," Korath said, and now his voice carried a tremor. "No fleet movements, no weapons charging, nothing."
"They accept their fate," Rixus declared, though he didn't believe his own words. "Begin the attack. Target the orbital installations first, then the major population centers."
The Eternal Dominion's weapons began to power up. Across the fleet, similar preparations were underway. Plasma cannons heating, missile bays opening, fighter wings preparing for launch. 1,200 ships, united in purpose, ready to demonstrate why the Zirathi Collective had never known defeat. The first volley was devastating. Hundreds of warheads streaked toward the orbital platforms, each one carrying enough destructive power to crack a small moon. Plasma beams lanced through the void, designed to vaporize anything they touched. Fighter screens deployed, ready to engage any response. The humans' reaction was immediate.
Space itself seemed to ripple. The warheads didn't detonate. They simply ceased to exist. One moment they were streaking toward their targets, the next they were gone, their atomic structures disassembled with surgical precision. The plasma beams bent, curving away from the orbital platforms and dissipating harmlessly into the void. The fighters found their systems failing, their engines dying, their pilots left floating helplessly in space.
And then the human fleet arrived. They emerged from nowhere. No hyperspace signatures, no transit flares, just sudden existence where moments before there had been empty space. Vrixis counted them as they appeared. 10, then 50, then 100, then more than his sensors could track.
They were smaller than the Zirathi vessels, sleeker, designed with aesthetics that seemed almost organic. They made no threatening movements, issued no challenges. They simply surrounded the collective fleet in an encompassing sphere and waited.
Commander, Korat's voice was barely audible. I'm reading the human vessels now. Their power output is... I don't understand these numbers.
Show me. The display flickered, and Vrixis felt his secondary heart stop. Each human vessel, even the smallest ones, was generating more energy than the Eternal Dominion's entire reactor array. Their weapon systems, now visible on detailed scans, operated on principles that the Zirathi sensors couldn't even categorize. Their shields were layers upon layers of protective fields, each one sufficient to withstand the combined firepower of the entire collective fleet. And at the center of the human formation was something else, something that the sensors could barely perceive, something that seemed to twist space around it simply by existing.
"What is that?" Vrixis whispered.
Unknown, Commander. Our sensors keep returning errors. Whatever it is, it's not fully in our dimension.
A new message arrived, and this time, when the human appeared in the holographic display, its expression had changed. There was something in its eyes that Vrixis recognized. "Pity, Fleet Commander," the human said. "We gave you a chance to turn back. You didn't take it. Now we must demonstrate why that was a mistake."
The human vessel at the center of the formation, the one that the sensors couldn't properly read, began to move. As it did, Vrixis's sensor displays went haywire. Readings that should have been impossible cascaded across his screens. Energy signatures that violated the laws of physics as the Zirathi understood them. Gravitational anomalies that suggested the human ship was somehow manipulating the fabric of space-time itself.
"What you're seeing," the human continued, as if sensing Vrixis's confusion, "is the result of 300 years of development. 300 years since we first achieved interstellar travel. 300 years of war."
The human's expression flickered with something that might have been remembered pain.
You see, Fleet Commander, you're not the first conquerors to find us. The Kasari came when we were young, when we had barely left our homeworld. They killed 17 billion of our people before we drove them back. The machine came next, machine intelligences that wanted to harvest us for processing power. We lost Mars to them before we developed the weapons to fight back.
The void dwellers, the crystalline consciousness, the swarm, they all came, and they all thought they would be the ones to finally break us.
The human leaned forward slightly, and suddenly its voice was no longer calm. It was something else entirely, something that made Vrixis's primal brain scream in recognition of a superior predator.
They were all wrong. The ship at the center of the human formation fired a single shot.
It wasn't a beam or a missile or anything that the Zirathi understood as a weapon. It was simply a point of absolute darkness that appeared in front of one of the conquest carriers, a sphere of nothingness that expanded to exactly the size of the vessel and then contracted in the space between heartbeats. Where the conquest carrier had been, there was nothing. No debris, no residue, no evidence that a 3-kilometer warship carrying 1 million warriors had ever existed.
That was a demonstration, the human said. We have removed your vessel from this dimensional plane. Its crew, its cargo, its armaments,
They now exist in a space that we created specifically for this purpose. They are unharmed but utterly contained. They will remain there until we decide otherwise.
Vrixis couldn't speak. His mandibles were clicking uselessly, his 4 primary eyes fixed on the empty space where his ship had been.
You have 1,199 vessels remaining, the human continued. Each of my ships is carrying similar weapons. We could end this in seconds, but we're not going to.
The human's expression shifted again, and now Vrixis saw something he hadn't expected.
Weariness.
We are tired of killing, Fleet Commander. We've done so much of it. When we were young, we did it to each other. Thousands of years of wars that nearly destroyed us. Then we did it to survive against species like yours, and we became very, very good at it.
The human paused, and in that pause, Vrixis finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't a civilization. This was a species forged in the fires of perpetual conflict, tempered by threats that had forced them to evolve beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. They hadn't just survived their encounters with hostile aliens. They had learned from each one, adapted, grown stronger.
And now they were so far beyond the Zirathi that the concept of a fair fight was laughable.
You have a choice, the human said. The same choice that every would-be conqueror has been given since we established these borders. You can turn around, leave our space, and never return. You can go back to your collective and tell them that humanity is not to be touched, not to be threatened, not to be bothered in any way.
The human leaned back slightly. Or you can fight. You can throw everything you have at us, and we will systematically disassemble your fleet until there's nothing left. We won't kill your crews. We don't do that anymore unless we have to. But your ships, your weapons, your capability to harm anyone ever again, those will be taken from you.
Vrixis found his voice. You would let us live after we came here to destroy you?
The human's expression was unreadable. We've learned that killing doesn't solve anything. It just creates new enemies, new cycles of revenge, new wars. We've had enough of that. So yes, we'll let you live, if you choose to live.
The fleet commander looked at his tactical displays, at the overwhelming force arrayed against him, at the impossible readings that suggested technologies centuries beyond anything the collective possessed. He thought about the Zirathi conquests, the species they had subjugated, the worlds they had stripped bare. He thought about what would happen if he returned home with his fleet intact, but his mission failed.
The collective would not accept this. They would send more ships, more warriors, more weapons. They would challenge humanity again and again until...
Until what? Until humanity got tired of restraint and simply eliminated them?
I need to contact my government, Vrixis said slowly. They need to understand what we've encountered.
Then contact them, the human said. We'll wait. We've been waiting a long time for someone to make the right choice. We can wait a little longer.
The communication with the collective's High Council was the most difficult conversation of Vrixis's life.
He stood in his private chambers, holographic displays showing the 17 lords who ruled the Zirathi with absolute authority. He showed them the sensor readings, the impossible technologies, the casual demonstration that had erased a 3-kilometer warship from existence without leaving a single atom behind.
They did not believe him. "This is trickery," High Lord Mavris declared, his scales flushing with anger. "Some form of illusion designed to frighten us. The collective cannot be deterred by shadows and lies."
"It is no trick, High Lord," Vrixis insisted. "I have seen it with my own eyes. Their technology is beyond anything we possess, beyond anything we could develop in 1,000 cycles."
Then we will develop it in 2,000, Lord Thaseres countered. We will study them, learn from them, and eventually we will overcome them. No species is invincible.
High Lord, with respect, they have offered us peace. They will let us leave. They ask only that we never return.
The council chamber erupted in outrage. Lords shouted over each other, their voices blending into a cacophony of wounded pride and denial. The collective had never retreated. The collective had never accepted terms from a lesser species. The very concept was antithetical to everything they believed about themselves.
"You will continue the attack," High Lord Mavers commanded when order was finally restored. "You will determine the limits of their capabilities. You will find weaknesses. And if you cannot, if you truly cannot, then you will fight to the last ship, and the collective will honor your sacrifice by building a fleet that can finish what you started."
Vrixis felt something break inside him. "High Lord, you're asking me to send my crews to their deaths, not for victory, for nothing. They will defeat us without effort, and then they will be forced to decide whether we're worth keeping alive at all."
"Then die with honor, Fleet Commander. It is all that any of us can do."
The transmission ended. Vrixis stood alone in his chambers for a long time, thinking about duty, about honor, about the 1,000,000 warriors in his fleet who trusted him with their lives, and about the human whose eyes had held such weariness, such exhaustion with violence, such desperate hope that this encounter might end differently.
He made his decision.
"Fleet Commander, the Council has issued orders for immediate attack," Karath reported when Vrixis returned to the bridge. "All ships are standing by."
Vrixis settled into his command chair, looking at the tactical display that showed the human fleet still surrounding them in patient silence. Broadcast the following message to all ships on the collective frequency. Priority override. Command authorization.
Karath hesitated. "Commander?"
The communications officer opened the channel, and Vrixis began to speak.
"Warriors of the collective, this is Fleet Commander Vrixis. I have received orders from the High Council to continue our attack on the human forces. These orders are based on incomplete information and wounded pride. Following them will result in the destruction of our fleet and the deaths of every warrior under my command."
He paused, aware that his words were being recorded, that they would be analyzed and judged by generations to come.
"I am refusing those orders." Gasps echoed across the bridge. Korath stared at him with something that might have been admiration or terror.
"What I have seen today has changed my understanding of the universe," Vrixis continued. "The humans are not weak. They are not primitive. They are a species that has survived horrors that would have destroyed us, and they have emerged from those horrors with power that defies comprehension. They have offered us mercy, genuine mercy, without conditions beyond our departure." He leaned forward. "I do not believe that the collective should be destroyed because our leaders cannot accept that we have finally met our match. I do not believe that our warriors should die for nothing, and I do not believe that courage requires stupidity."
He took a deep breath. "Any ship that wishes to follow me is welcome. We will turn around, we will leave this space, and we will tell the truth about what we've seen, even if that truth costs us everything."
The Crimson Fang stands with the commander.
The void's edge follows.
The eternal claw will turn. One by one, the ships of the fleet registered their support. Not all of them. Perhaps 300 vessels declared their intention to follow the High Council's orders, but the majority, the vast majority. Vrixis felt something strange in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it.
Hope. The human message came through moments later, and this time the figure on the display was different. Older, perhaps, with lines around its eyes and gray in its fibrous head covering.
"Fleet Commander Vrixis," the human said. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. I've been monitoring your communications."
You heard my transmission to the fleet. We hear everything in our space, Commander, and I wanted to tell you something before you leave. The Admiral's expression softened slightly. What you just did took more courage than fighting ever could. Turning away from a battle, choosing peace when everything in your culture screams for war,
That's the hardest thing any warrior can do. Vrixis was silent, unsure how to respond.
We've been where you are, the Admiral continued. Humans, I mean. There was a time when we couldn't imagine backing down from any fight, when our pride wouldn't let us admit that some battles weren't worth fighting. It took us a long time and a lot of suffering to learn better.
She paused. You're learning faster than we did. That gives me hope for your species.
What will happen to the ships that refuse to leave? Vrixis asked. The ones who plan to attack?
The same thing we showed you will remove their vessels from normal space and contain them. Their crews will be returned to your territory unharmed, eventually, but they'll have a lot of time to think about their choices first.
Vrixis nodded slowly. Admiral Chen, may I ask you something?
Go ahead.
You could have destroyed us the moment we entered your space. Your technology is so far beyond ours that the battle would have been meaningless. Why did you wait? Why give us choices?
The Admiral's expression grew distant, as if she was looking at something far away.
Because we remember what it was like to be afraid, she said finally. We remember what it was like to face enemies that seemed unstoppable. And we remember the ones who helped us, the few species in this galaxy who chose cooperation over conquest. They showed us that there was another way, and now we try to show others.
She focused on Vrixis again. The universe is vast enough for everyone, Commander. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game of conquest and subjugation. There are wonders out there that make warfare seem like a petty distraction. Maybe someday your people will be ready to see them.
Vrixis thought about the stars he had seen in his long career, the burning nebulae, the ancient ruins, the cosmic phenomena that defied explanation. He thought about how much of that wonder had been overshadowed by the collective's endless hunger for more territory, more resources, more power.
Perhaps, he said slowly, perhaps someday we will. The Zarathi fleet turned and began its long journey home. Behind them, the human vessels watched in patient silence. The ships that had refused to leave were surrounded, their weapons disabled, their crews secured in the strange dimensional prison that the humans had created. They would live, but they would remember their helplessness for the rest of their lives.
Vrixis stood at the observation dome of the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars streak past as they entered hyperspace. He knew what awaited him. Trials, probably execution, certainly dishonor. The High Council would not forgive his defiance, and the collective's traditions demanded harsh punishment for those who refused to die in battle. But he had saved his fleet. He had saved nearly 1 million warriors who would have died for nothing. And he had learned something that might, in time, change the collective forever.
There were things in the universe more powerful than the Zarathi, and those things, at least some of them, had chosen mercy instead of destruction.
The door to the observation dome opened, and Karath stepped through. The tactical officer moved to stand beside his commander, looking out at the star-streaked void.
The crew is with you, Commander, Karath said quietly. Whatever happens when we return, they want you to know that.
Vrixis nodded. I appreciate that. May I ask what you're thinking?
Vrixis was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice soft and thoughtful. I'm thinking about what the Admiral said, about there being wonders in the universe that make warfare seem petty. I'm thinking that I've spent my entire life fighting, conquering, destroying, and I've never really looked at the stars, not as anything other than territory to be claimed.
He turned to face Karath. I'm thinking that maybe, if enough of us survive the Council's wrath, we might have a chance to build something different, something that doesn't require blood and suffering to sustain.
Karath considered this. The Council will never accept that.
No, but the Council is old, and old things eventually end. Vrixis looked back at the stars. The humans were young once too. They were conquerors like us, warriors like us, driven by pride and fear like us. And they changed.
Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. He paused. Perhaps we will have to as well.
3 cycles later, the Xyrathi fleet returned to collective space.
The trials were brutal. Vrixis was stripped of his rank, his honors, his family name. He was condemned to work in the deep mines of Korath Prime, where disgraced officers were sent to live out their days in meaningless labor.
But something unexpected happened. The story of what had occurred in human space spread through the collective despite the High Council's efforts to suppress it. Warriors whispered about the technology that could erase ships from existence, about the power that had been demonstrated with such casual ease. Scientists analyzed the fragmentary sensor data that had survived and grew quiet, their calculations confirming what Vrixis had said.
The humans were not a threat to be overcome. They were a wall, an absolute barrier that marked the limit of collective expansion in that direction.
More importantly, they were a choice.
For the first time in 3,000 cycles, the Xyrathi collective was forced to consider the possibility that conquest might not be the answer to everything, that there were species in the galaxy that could not be defeated, only negotiated with, that the endless expansion that had defined their civilization might have to stop.
It was a revolutionary thought. It was a terrifying thought. But for some, for those who had followed Vrixis home, for those who had heard the whispers and wondered, it was also a liberating thought.
Because if the universe wasn't just a battlefield to be conquered, then what else might it be?
What else could they become?
20 cycles later, a small Xyrathi vessel approached the border of human space. It carried no weapons. Its shields were minimal. Its crew consisted of a single individual, an older Xyrathi with scales that had faded from their once bright purple to a dusty gray, his body marked by the scars of hard labor and harder times.
Vrixis had escaped from the mines 3 cycles ago, a feat that should have been impossible. He had crossed collective space in stolen vessels and forged identities, always moving towards this moment.
The marker buoys challenged him, and he responded.
This is former Fleet Commander Vrixis of the Xyrathi Collective, requesting asylum in United Earth space. I come in peace. I come to learn.
There was a long pause. Then a voice responded. Human, translated through his communication system.
Former Fleet Commander Vrixis, your reputation precedes you. Please hold your position. A diplomatic vessel will escort you to our territory.
Vrixis let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Understood. Thank you.
He settled back in his pilot's seat, looking at the stars ahead. They were the same stars he had seen on his first approach to human space, but now they looked different. They looked like possibilities instead of targets. The human vessel arrived within an hour, a small, elegant craft that made his stolen ship look like a primitive toy. It pulled alongside him, and a hatch opened.
Welcome to United Earth Space, a voice said. Please follow us. We have a lot to talk about.
Vrixis smiled, a human expression that had become popular among the collective's youth, and engaged his engines.
Epilogue, 100 cycles later. Ambassador Vrixis of the United Species Coalition stood before the gathered representatives of 47 spacefaring civilizations. The chamber was vast, designed to accommodate beings of every conceivable morphology, from the crystalline Proxys to the gaseous nebulites to the ancient machine minds of the rebuilt Mechanae.
And in the seats of honor, the humans. They had changed in the centuries since Vrixis had first fled to their space. Their technology had advanced even further, their influence had spread, and their philosophy of cooperation had become the foundation for the largest peaceful alliance in galactic history. But in their eyes, Vrixis could still see echoes of what they had been. Warriors, survivors, a species that had stared into the abyss and refused to blink.
Representatives, Vrixis began, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. I stand before you as proof that change is possible. 100 cycles ago, I led a fleet of conquerors into human space,
intent on subjugation and destruction. Today, I stand as ambassador for an alliance that has brought prosperity to worlds that once knew only war." He paused, looking at the faces around him, some familiar, some strange, all united by the bonds of mutual cooperation.
The humans taught us something that we should have learned long ago. The universe is not a prize to be claimed. It is a wonder to be shared, to be destroyed. They are neighbors, colleagues, friends.
He turned to face the human delegation, and in the front row he saw a face that had aged but remained familiar. Admiral Chen had retired decades ago, but she had come out for this occasion, the 100th anniversary of the first contact between humans and Zyrathi.
100 cycles ago, Vrixis said, a human admiral told me that the universe was vast enough for everyone. I didn't believe her then. I do now.
He bowed, a gesture he had learned from the humans, a sign of respect and gratitude. "Thank you for showing us the way."
The chamber erupted in applause, and Vrixis stood at its center, the former conqueror who had become an ambassador of peace. Behind him, the stars shone through the observation windows, infinite, beautiful, and finally seen for what they truly were. Not a battlefield. A gift.
In the archives of the United Earth Defense Force, there exists a classified file labeled First Contact, Zyrathi Collective, Case Study in Nonviolent Resolution.
Most of it consists of technical reports, sensor logs, and diplomatic correspondence. But at the end, there is a handwritten note, an anomaly in an otherwise digital collection. It reads,
They entered our space expecting to find victims. Their sensors caught something else, a species that had learned the hardest lesson in the galaxy, that strength isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you choose to protect.
We could have crushed them. We chose not to, and because of that choice, we have allies today where we might have had enemies. That's the lesson I hope we never forget. The universe is full of nightmares, but it's also full of potential friends. The difference is often just a matter of patience.
And time. We have time now. Let's use it wisely.
The note is signed by Admiral Sarah Chen, dated on the anniversary of her retirement. Below it, someone has added a postscript.
The commander was right. Some things are worth the wait.
In the void between stars, where human space meets the territories of the Coalition, there are no more marker buoys warning travelers to turn back.
Instead, there are welcome stations, orbital facilities where ships of 100 different species dock to trade, share information, and experience the wonders of a galaxy at peace. The humans staff these stations alongside Zyrathi officers, Melori merchants, and representatives of species that would have been enemies in an earlier age. They work together, live together, and slowly build a future that none of them could have imagined alone.
Because, in the end, the nightmare that the Zyrathi sensors caught wasn't humanity's capacity for destruction.
It was their capacity for change,
For hope.
for becoming something better than what they had been. And that, more than any weapon or technology, was the most terrifying thing of all, because it meant that the old ways of conquest and subjugation were truly obsolete.
The universe was moving on, and those who couldn't move with it would be left behind.
Far from the Coalition's borders, in a region of space that even the humans have not yet explored, something ancient stirs.
It has slept for eons, waiting for the galaxy to evolve beyond its petty conflicts, waiting for species to rise above their baser natures, waiting for a sign that the experiment was worth continuing.
Through senses that span dimensions, it observes the Coalition. It watches the former conquerors working alongside their would-be victims. It sees the children of warriors learning to build instead of destroy. It witnesses the slow, painful, beautiful process of civilizations growing up. And for the first time in millions of cycles, it allows itself to feel something that might be called satisfaction.
The nightmare, it seems, has become a dream of what could be, of what should be,
of what perhaps finally is. Authors afterward.
This story began with a simple question. What if the scariest thing about humanity wasn't our capacity for violence, but our capacity for change?
Science fiction often portrays first contact as a clash of civilizations, with the outcome determined by who has the bigger guns. But real history shows us something more complex, that the most profound transformations happen not through conquest, but through connection. The Zarathi came to human space expecting to find another victim. Instead, they found a mirror, a reflection of what they might become if they were willing to let go of their old ways.
And that, I think, is the real message of humanity. Fuck yeah stories. It's not that we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. It's that we keep trying. We keep growing. We keep reaching for something better.
even when we fail, especially when we fail.
Because that's what makes us human. And maybe, just maybe, it's what might make us worthy of the stars.
In memory of all the soldiers who laid down their weapons,
and all the enemies who became friends.
may we prove worthy of their example.
The end.